The golden morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Agnes Church, casting sacred colors across the pews. Though beautiful, the silence inside felt uneasy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Sister Catherine Doyle had sensed it for days, that something wasn't right beyond the altar. Something old. Something they thought had been buried. The church had been closed to the public for minor repairs, but this was different. The stench coming from the old sacristy, a sealed room untouched for over 30 years, had grown unbearable. That morning, one of the younger nuns nearly fainted after hearing whispers behind the locked door. Officer Mark Halstead arrived minutes after the call, his K9 partner, Leo, leading the way with urgency. Leo, a German shepherd trained in search and rescue, was usually calm, measured. But not today. Today, he pulled hard on the leash, tail stiff, low growls rumbling from his throat as he approached the sacristy door. Sister Louise Brennan, frail but sharp-eyed despite her 74 years, was the first to speak. That door hasn't opened since Father Mallory passed. Not a soul has stepped foot inside. Mark crouched beside Leo, watching the dog sniff aggressively at the threshold. Behind him stood Officer Julia Martinez, alert and focused, scanning the space. The air smelled like rot and something else, something living. Leo let out a sharp bark, then lunged at the door with such force the wood creaked under the pressure. The noise echoed through the stone walls, startling the nuns gathered nearby. Sister Marie clutched her rosary tighter, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Something's back there," Mark muttered. He pressed his ear against the door and paused. Then a soft thump, a faint, unmistakable sound. Something or someone was moving. "We need to breach," Julia said, stepping forward. "That's not just old furniture shifting." Mark nodded, steadying his voice. "On 3. But before he could begin the count, a sudden bang slammed from the other side. It rattled the brass handles and sent Sister Marie stumbling back with a scream. Leo barked ferociously, pacing, growling, scraping at the door with both paws. Then a voice, muffled, small, trembling. "Please, help me." Everyone froze. Mark looked at Julia. Her eyes were wide, her hand already on her holster. The air in the church seemed to collapse inward, pressing on their lungs. Sister Catherine whispered, barely audible, "No one should be alive in there." The decision to break the door wasn't made lightly. Mark could feel the weight of every second ticking by. Sister Catherine's whisper still lingered in the air. No one should be alive in there, but someone was, or at least something that could sound like a frightened child. Leo continued to scratch at the bottom of the door, now whining in frustration, desperate to reach whatever was inside. Mark took one step back, lifted his boot, and kicked hard. The frame shuddered. On the second blow, the old lock gave way with a loud crack, and the door creaked open, revealing only darkness and a wave of cold air so sharp it felt unnatural for the warm spring morning outside. Leo pushed in first, nose twitching furiously, body tense like a loaded spring. Mark and Officer Martinez followed closely, flashlights drawn, slicing through the shadows of the long-forgotten sacristy. The room smelled of mildew, decaying wood, and something metallic, blood, maybe? Dust danced in the beams of their lights, but beyond the dust, the space looked untouched. Old robes hung from rusted hooks on the wall. A broken chalice lay half-buried in debris. But what stopped Mark's breath was what he saw near the far corner. A small shape, curled up, shaking, beneath a collapsed altar cloth. "Is that a child?" Julia murmured, her voice cracking. Mark stepped closer, and the shape moved, slowly, weakly. Leo sat beside it, whining softly now, as if sensing something fragile, something broken. Mark knelt, gently lifting the fabric. There, huddled in the filth and shadows, was a little girl, pale, shivering, and wide-eyed. Her lips were cracked, and her hair was matted with dirt and cobwebs. But she was alive. "Hey, you're safe now," Mark said, barely above a whisper. The girl didn't answer. She stared at him with hollow eyes, blinking slowly, then looked down at Leo. One trembling hand reached out and rested on the dog's head. "What's your name?" Julia asked gently, kneeling beside them. The girl's voice came like a whisper carried by dust. "Grace." They wrapped her in a blanket brought by one of the nuns, who could barely hold back tears. Sister Marie crossed herself again and again, whispering prayers under her breath. How could she have survived in there? She asked no one in particular. There's no food, no light, nothing. Mark didn't have answers. He only felt the cold dread growing heavier in his chest. As Julia called for medical support, Mark noticed something scrawled on the wall behind where Grace had been laying. It was barely visible through the dirt. He leaned closer, squinting, then froze. Carved into the stone, in uneven, childlike handwriting, were 3 chilling words. "He still watches." Grace was taken to the convent's infirmary, a modest, dimly lit room with clean sheets and an old crucifix hanging over the bed. She hadn't spoken another word since saying her name. Her gaze remained distant, locked on the ceiling, as if she were still trapped behind that door in her mind. Julia stayed beside her while Mark stood in the hallway, replaying the scene in his head. That phrase etched into the stone. "He still watches." Wouldn't leave him. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they were carved. Desperate, deep, and deliberate. Sister Louise shuffled slowly down the hall and stood beside him, holding an old prayer book against her chest. "The last time anyone went inside that room," she whispered, "Father Mallory was still alive. He died in there. They said it was a stroke. But I never believed that." Mark turned to her. "Why not?" She hesitated, lowering her voice even more. Because his face, when they found him, it wasn't peace. It was fear. Mouth wide open, eyes, like he saw something before he died. Meanwhile, Leo paced outside the infirmary door, refusing to sit or settle. Every few minutes, he'd growl lowly at the wall across from him, staring as if he could see something the humans couldn't. Sister Catherine approached and gently laid a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Whatever this child went through," she said, "it didn't happen by accident. Someone or something put her in that room." Mark nodded, his jaw tight. "And they wanted her to be forgotten." Inside, Grace finally moved. Her eyes darted to Julia, who leaned in gently. "Grace, can you tell me how you got in there?" Grace opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She reached beneath the blanket and pulled something from her dress. A small pendant on a chain, shaped like a cross but bent, distorted, as if melted. Julia took it carefully. It was warm, too warm. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Grace just shook her head, lips trembling. That night, Mark returned to the sacristy alone. He needed answers, some kind of clue the others might have missed. The cold inside the room hadn't lifted. As he scanned the corners with his flashlight, something new caught his attention. A section of the stone wall looked different, almost like a door frame, but sealed. Suddenly, Leo let out a sharp bark from the hallway. Mark turned toward the noise, just in time to hear Grace's voice again from the infirmary, not afraid this time, but calm and cold. "He doesn't like when they come back here." Mark didn't sleep that night. After Grace's unsettling words, "He doesn't like when they come back here." He stayed in the church, sitting in silence near the sacristy, watching the wall he believed was hiding something. He'd seen structures like that during his service overseas. Old stone buildings where doorways had been hidden behind layers of mortar. But why here? Why in a church? His instincts screamed that the sacristy wasn't just sealed physically. It had been hidden intentionally, like something sacred and dangerous locked away. As dawn broke, Sister Catherine returned to the sacristy, holding an old keyring. She hesitated before speaking. "There are tunnels," she admitted. "Or, there used to be. The church was built over a century ago. Some say the priests used them to escape during times of persecution. Others say they were for something else." Mark looked at her. "What do you mean, something else?" Her face paled. "Whispers, sacrifices, rituals that had no place in the light." Mark stared at her, uncertain whether to believe her, until Leo growled again, staring at that same wall with eerie intensity. In the infirmary, Julia sat beside Grace, who still hadn't eaten. The little girl's eyes fluttered as she drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring things under her breath. Names, numbers, and what sounded like verses. Sister Marie entered quietly and sat on the other side of the bed. "I've heard these words before," she whispered. "Father Mallory used to say them. During his final days, he would wander the church at night, speaking to shadows. We thought it was dementia." Julia leaned in. "What kind of verses?" Marie replied slowly. "They carved his name into stone and he opened his eyes. That's what he repeated over and over." Back in the sacristy, Mark ran his hand along the suspicious section of the wall. The stone was colder there, tighter. He tapped lightly, hollow. Without a word, he grabbed a crowbar from the toolkit and began to work at the mortar. Leo stood at his side, ears alert, watching the hallway. Mark chipped slowly, carefully, until the faint outline of a door began to appear, arched, old, and sealed with a rusted iron plate. At the center, carved into the metal, was the same distorted cross Grace had held in her hand. Suddenly, the church bells rang, sharply, unexpectedly. No one had touched the tower in years. Mark froze. Then a sound from behind the wall made his blood run cold. Scraping, like fingernails on stone, followed by a voice. "I remember you, Mark." The voice echoed like it came from inside Mark's skull, not just through the stone. "I remember you, Mark." He stumbled back, heart hammering, the crowbar slipping from his hands and clattering to the floor. Leo barked once, sharply, but didn't approach the wall. He sat stiffly, ears flattened, like he was awaiting a command, or warning him not to go further. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead, his mind spinning. No one should know his name behind a sealed wall. Not unless someone or something had been watching. He stepped into the hallway and pulled Julia aside. "The wall spoke," he said, quietly but urgently. Her eyes narrowed. "You mean you heard something from behind it?" "No," Mark said, voice tightening. "It knew me." For the first time since she'd joined him on the case, Julia looked afraid. She didn't ask for proof. She could see it in his eyes. Sister Catherine appeared, summoned by the bell that had rung inexplicably. "No one touched the tower," she said, shaking her head. The rope was still tied off. Mark glanced at Leo, then back at the wall. "Then it's not a warning. It's a message." That night, Grace awoke screaming. Julia ran to her bedside, and the girl clung to her, sobbing. "He's in the floor," she cried. "He walks underneath. He watches the sleepers." The words chilled the room. Sister Marie tried to calm her, but Grace was shaking violently, pointing to the stone beneath her bed. Julia gently lifted her and moved her to a cot across the room. Later, when the nuns pulled back the rug beneath the bed, they found what Grace had seen. Scratches. Dozens of them. Small, narrow, deep into the stone. Like someone trapped beneath had been clawing to get out. Mark returned to the sacristy after midnight. He brought a flashlight, his service weapon, and a notebook filled with entries from an old case. One he thought was unrelated until now. A decade earlier, when he was still a rookie, he'd responded to a case at a foster home in upstate New York. A girl had disappeared. No forced entry. No body. Just a melted cross left on her pillow. The girl's name was Grace Whitmore. His hands trembled as he flipped through the records again. The photo, the date, the name. It didn't add up. If it was the same Grace, she'd be 17 by now, not 7. But the girl lying in that infirmary bed was exactly the same. Same eyes, same face, not a year older. From the sacristy, Leo suddenly let out a deep growl. Mark raised his flashlight toward the half-unsealed wall just in time to see a hand, small, pale, and impossibly long-fingered, retract into the darkness between the stones. Mark couldn't shake the image of that hand. Thin, bone-white, almost too long to belong to a child. It hadn't just reached out. It had waited, timed. It knew he was watching, As he stood alone in the sacristy, Leo pressed against his leg, tense and alert, as though protecting him from something unseen. Mark's thoughts spiraled. The photo of Grace from 10 years ago was identical to the girl upstairs. That was no coincidence. And if that's true, then this wasn't just a case. It was personal. The next morning, Sister Louise knocked gently on the rectory door. She held a leather-bound journal wrapped in a linen cloth. "It belonged to Father Mallory," she said. "He kept it hidden behind the altar. We only found it after your dog started digging near the base." Mark opened it slowly. The pages were yellowed, ink faded but still legible. The early entries spoke of sermons, whether routine, then suddenly the handwriting changed. Shaky, erratic. "He walks below. He calls the children. He speaks in my sleep." Over and over, the same sentence appeared. "The church is not empty." Julia met Mark in the hallway, her face pale. "We need to talk," she said, pulling him aside. "I just got off the phone with missing persons. There's more. 3 other children vanished over the last 40 years, all from church-run shelters or foster homes. Every case ended in the same way. No evidence, no suspects, and each one left behind a melted iron cross." She showed him the photos. Mark's breath caught in his throat. One of the girls, missing in 1985, was wearing a necklace that looked exactly like the one Grace had given Julia. Meanwhile, Grace was drawing in silence. Crayons on paper, her little hand moving slowly, carefully. When Julia checked on her, she froze. Grace had drawn the sacristy wall, brick by brick. But behind it she had drawn something else. A face. Twisted, gaunt, smiling with too many teeth. Below the drawing, she had written 2 words in shaky letters. "He remembers." Mark stood in the church courtyard that evening, eyes on the bell tower, the journal tight in his grip. For the first time, he remembered something from his own childhood. A church, a storm, hiding in a confessional while someone screamed from beneath the floorboards. He'd told himself it was a dream. His therapist had called it trauma displacement. But now he wasn't so sure. That night, as Leo slept uneasily beside him, Mark awoke to the sound of footsteps. Not outside, not down the hall, underneath. And then, faintly, the voice returned. Right below the bed. "You left me, Mark." Mark sat upright in bed, sweat clinging to his neck. The voice was gone, but its echo lingered in his mind like a bruise. "You left me, Mark." Leo was already awake, staring at the floor, body rigid. Mark didn't move. Not yet. He was remembering now. Not pieces. Everything. He hadn't just dreamed of the screams beneath the floorboards as a child. He'd been there. It was a church much like St. Agnes, stone walls, iron crosses. He'd wandered during a storm, hiding from a father who drank too much. And that's when he saw it. A child being pulled through the floor. A boy, silent, eyes wide, staring directly at Mark as he disappeared into the dark. The next day, Mark didn't say a word to Julia or the sisters. He drove to the archives himself, back to the city, where boxes of church history collected dust. After hours of digging through brittle folders and yellowing papers, he found it. A report from 1989. A church in Rochester. Collapse. 1 child missing, never found. His name, Daniel Whitmore. The surname jolted Mark so hard he dropped the file. He scrambled to pick it up, hands shaking. Grace's last name was Whitmore. "It can't be," he muttered. But it was. Grace wasn't just another victim. She was related. Back at the convent, Julia paced outside the infirmary. Grace had stopped drawing, stopped speaking, just sat there, staring at the wall. Sister Marie tried to comfort her, reading softly from Psalms, but Grace wouldn't respond. Just when Julia was about to leave, Grace whispered a single sentence. "He took my brother too." That was the confirmation. Mark's theory wasn't paranoia, it was unfolding. This thing had been hunting her family for decades. But why? Later that evening, Mark returned to the sacristy. He examined the journal again, flipping to the final page. One phrase was written over and over. carved into the paper so hard the tip had broken through. "The children are the key." Beneath that line was a date, tomorrow's date. His breath caught. That wasn't just a note. It was a warning, or a countdown. Julia entered quietly, holding her phone. "Mark, there's something else." She showed him a grainy black and white photo sent from an old diocesan yearbook. "This is Father Mallory, and this is the boy from your foster case." She pointed to a child beside the priest, labeled only as DW. Mark's heart dropped. He recognized that face. It was the same boy from his memory, the one taken beneath the floor, the one who looked back at him, the one who hadn't aged in over 30 years. The storm rolled in just after sunset. Thunder growled low above St. Agnes, and the air turned thick with static. Mark stood in the sacristy, staring at the sealed wall. He'd spent the day researching every lead, connecting every disappearance, every name, every symbol. The distorted crosses, the journal entries, the whispering voice. They all pointed to one thing. Something had been buried alive, and not just once. It had been fed. Grace, Daniel, the others, sacrificed across decades, not to a man, but to a presence that lived below. Sister Catherine appeared behind him, her expression grim. She held a rusted iron key in her hand, unlike anything Mark had seen before. "This was hidden in Father Mallory's robes," she said. "He called it the vault key. We always thought it was metaphorical." Mark took it carefully, its weight heavy and oddly warm. "There's a door beneath the chapel," Catherine continued. "It's not on any map. No one talks about it. But I've seen it. Once." Mark felt the pieces snapping together. "That's where it lives." Grace began screaming at midnight. Julia ran to her room, but the girl wasn't in bed. She was on the floor, curled up and trembling. "He's awake," she sobbed. "He knows you're coming." When Julia tried to lift her, Grace looked her dead in the eyes and said something that stopped her heart. "If he dies, I die too." Julia froze, not knowing whether to believe it or fear what it meant. Could Grace be tethered to the thing beneath? Was she the bait or the door? With Leo at his side, Mark descended the narrow stone steps that led beneath the chapel. The key turned with effort in the rusted lock, and the iron door groaned open, releasing a breath of air so cold it cut through his coat. The tunnel stretched out in darkness, damp and claustrophobic. Strange carvings lined the walls, crosses bent backward, faces with hollow eyes, mouths sewn shut. Leo growled low but followed without hesitation. Halfway down the tunnel, Mark found what looked like a pit covered by a grated hatch. He knelt, shining his light down. There were bones, dozens, small ones, children. He felt his stomach twist, bile rising in his throat. At the far end, another door, this one older, carved from stone. Etched across its surface, the name returns. Back in the convent, Grace sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Julia looked over, startled. Grace's voice was calm now, flat. "He's almost here," she said, her eyes blank. "And he remembers who Mark really is." Mark stood before the stone door, Leo tense at his side, tail low and ears pinned back. The air in the tunnel was unmoving, heavy, as if time had thickened around them. Mark reached out and touched the carvings, cold as ice. The phrase, "the name returns," wasn't just symbolic. Deep in his memory, something stirred. A voice, long buried, rose from the depths of his childhood. Not just fear, not just trauma, promise. One he had made or been forced to make when he was a child in another church, before he was old enough to understand what it meant. He placed his palm on the center of the door. A tremor ran through the stone, almost like a heartbeat. Leo let out a low whimper. Mark knew then, the thing behind this door wasn't just ancient. It was waiting for him, and maybe it always had been. He wasn't just a witness. He was part of this. Somehow he was chosen, a forgotten participant in a ritual that had started decades ago, and hadn't finished. Back upstairs, Julia sat beside Grace, who now rocked slowly, eyes closed. Her breath came in slow, mechanical patterns, like a ticking clock. "He knew Mark before," Grace whispered. "He gave Mark a name, but Mark broke it." Julia leaned closer. "What name?" Grace's eyes snapped open, her voice suddenly clear. "The gatekeeper." At that moment, the lights in the convent flickered. Distantly, they heard the sound of stone grinding against stone. Mark pushed open the ancient door. It didn't resist him, it welcomed him. The chamber inside was massive, circular, its ceiling disappearing into shadow. Candles flickered from unseen sources, though no flames were visible. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it a child. Not breathing, not dead, preserved, pale. It was Daniel, the same boy from the photo. Unaged, his eyes opened slowly. "You left me," the boy said, his voice echoing like it came from every wall. Mark stumbled backward. Leo barked, then whimpered. "They made me the offering," Daniel said. "But they needed to. You were supposed to stay." The memories returned in full. Mark, as a boy, told to choose between hiding or helping. He had run. He had lived. And Daniel had been taken. The room began to shake. The stone walls bled. From behind the pedestal, something rose. A tall, impossibly thin figure wrapped in cloth and bone, wearing a crown of nails and a face with no eyes. It whispered in a voice that sounded like every scream Mark had ever buried. "The gate opens tonight." The creature stood taller than anything Mark had ever faced in war, in life, or in nightmares. Its faceless head turned toward him slowly, yet he felt its gaze cut through him like a knife. The air in the chamber grew thick, pulsing with heat and something darker, regret, maybe. Daniel's body remained still atop the pedestal, his eyes open but distant, as if his soul had never left that moment beneath the church floor. The figure extended a skeletal hand toward Mark, palm open, inviting. A choice, again. Behind him, Leo whined but didn't flee. Loyal always. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as memories returned like floodwaters. The ritual, the broken promise, and the name whispered into his ear when he was barely 10 years old, Gatekeeper. He hadn't run that night just to save himself. He had severed a bond, leaving Daniel trapped in a space between death and memory. And now, the presence beneath the church had returned to finish what had been interrupted. Mark stepped forward. "Take me," he said. "Let the others go. Let Grace go. Let Daniel rest." The creature paused. Then, it lowered its hand and laughed. A deep, hollow, wet sound that echoed like bones snapping underwater. "Too late," it said without lips. "The gate opens with blood. Only blood closes it." As it moved forward, the chamber began to collapse. The stone groaned. Cracks split through the walls. Upstairs, Grace screamed and clutched her chest. Julia held her tightly. "He's trying to stop it," Grace gasped. "He's choosing right this time." Sister Catherine and Sister Marie gathered around them, praying louder and louder as the building shook violently, dust falling from the rafters. "It has to be him," Grace whispered. "Only him." Julia looked toward the staircase, tears already in her eyes. She knew Mark wasn't coming back. Below, Mark wrapped his arms around Daniel's body. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "This ends now." With all his strength, he pulled Daniel down from the pedestal. The creature screamed, a sound that cracked the very walls. Mark didn't flinch. He took the iron key, still in his coat, and plunged it into the pedestal's base. The chamber convulsed violently. The creature lunged forward, and in a flash of light, it was gone. When the ground stopped trembling, the vault was sealed. No doorway remained, just solid, silent stone. 3 days later, Grace opened her eyes and smiled for the first time. She asked if Leo was okay. Julia nodded, though her voice shook. "He never left the front of the church," she said. "He waited all night." Mark Halstead's name was never mentioned in the press, but the sisters lit a candle for him every morning, because some doors only close when the right person is willing to stay behind.